Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the METS Mets of New York town. Oh, the butcher and the baker and the people on the streets, where do they go? To meet the Mets!
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another Mets Hot Stove Live with two fourths of the Mets Roundtable. We got CP New York Sports here with me, Chris, hanging out with us today on the Hot Stove. We're going to talk about our Mets. And no, we're not going to talk about the choke job of the Cowboys. I promise you that. But I want to say before I get started, congratulations to the Michigan Wolverines, national champions. I got my hoodie, so I'm happy. So I just had to bring that up really quick. But welcome again to another Hot Stove, guys. It's been a little crazy with the NFL playoffs and trying to work in any type of damn news when it comes to the Mets or baseball in general. They seem like they've been on hiatus ever since the NFL playoffs have started. But we got some news to talk about. We got some international free agents to talk about. Is Parada expendable? Marte, Snell, DH, bullpen, and of course, Chris, how you doing, buddy? Staying warm?
Yeah, trying to. It's a snowy day out here in the DMV area, but I appreciate everyone tuning in on MLK Day. Happy Monday to everyone as well. We do have a lot to talk about, and it hasn't seemed like it because we haven't really gotten some Mets news here recently, but we're going to be talking about everything that you just mentioned, some international free agent signings, all that good stuff. Like I said, subscribe to the channel at CPNY Sports. Did two shorts over the weekend while I was kind of out and about, updating you all, giving a little PSA to Mets fans and these recent reports that we've seen, whether to believe them or not. It really seems like all these reporters are using the Mets as bait, as clickbait here. So we'll see soon enough as the offseason progresses, but definitely excited to be on here talking some Mets baseball again.
Absolutely. And I think the snow's coming up to the north side of where I am right now. So I'll be digging out my car tomorrow. But hey, it's New York. It's the East Coast. What are you going to do, right? So, all right. So the Mets international free agents, they signed 4 top 50 international free agents in the MLB pipeline. And that's a good sign for the New York Mets. The top 4 in the top 50 international free agents was Giovanni Rodriguez, catcher, Ramel Ortiz, shortstop, Yenzi Rivas, shortstop, and Edward Lantigua, outfielder, 6th, 26th, 31st, and 41st ranked in the 50 top MLB pipeline international free agents, and they signed 20 in total. And one of those are Vladdy Miguel Guerrero, which is son of Vladimir Guerrero Sr. and brother of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I know it's very hard to figure that out. Vladimir Jr., Sr. Listen, I think that's what Vladimir Guerrero wanted to do with his kids. I mean, there's thousands of other names he could have chosen, but we did get Vladdy signed at 16 years old. He is an infielder type outfielder. I believe he can play first base. I think he's a first baseman and can play a little bit of corner outfield, if I'm not mistaken. I was trying to read up on him before we went live, but that is good sign. So 20 international free agent signings overall, a lot of Venezuelan, a lot of Dominican, and one from the Bahamas, which is nice to see a couple of guys from the Bahamas holding it down, getting signed in the international draft. And his name is, if I can read it really quick, it is Bohan Adderley, is the Bahamian international free agent infield outfielder, and also a Colombian, which his name is Lionel Ramirez. So, Chris, when you heard the news, and we're going to talk definitely about the top international signing, that we're going to talk about the catcher in a little bit and why it's important when it comes to Kevin Parada. But what do you think about the international signings, and are you excited about these signings, considering the fact that the Mets have been lacking in the international free agent market. Basically, if you look at their international signings over the last 10 years, especially with the Wilpons, it was lackluster at best. So what do you think about the signings?
Yeah, the talent has been lackluster in previous regimes. And actually, just to put a caveat on this, is that David Stearns, I learned something new today. David Stearns actually had nothing to do with these signings here. These signings were already set in stone in the previous regime under Epler, etc. So David Stearns is not linked to any of these guys, even though he has been in the Dominican Republic meeting with these guys and also watching Marte play, doing a little bit of a tour there. David Stearns doesn't have anything to do with these guys in terms of going out and recruiting and signing these guys. Nonetheless, a little bit of an update as of 3 hours ago as well. I'm not sure if anything's changed since then. The Mets haven't officially signed Raymel Ortiz yet. The Mets have announced per their official account that they did sign obviously international free agent players, but Raymel Ortiz has not officially been signed as of right now, from what I know. But they did sign Giovanni Rodriguez, number 6 in the top 50 catcher, Giovanni Rodriguez. And like I said, the age class of all these guys, 16 to 17 years old, on the younger side of things, especially given that they haven't played a lick of baseball in the minor league system yet with the Mets. But so it's sort of hard to sort of predict what's going to happen to our pipeline that's already set in stone right now within the organization, taking into consideration these guys are going to be joining here shortly. But I do agree with you, like you said, in terms of the Kevin Parada notion. Like we've known for a long time now that of the 10, top 10 Mets prospects in the system, Kevin Parada has been consistently a name that has been floated out amongst Mets beat reporters and amongst the Mets fan base in general, that is expendable, especially given that Francisco Alvarez is presumably here to stay long term as the Mets' future franchise catcher, right? Coming off of a pretty strong season power-wise. The average dipped a little bit for Francisco Alvarez, but nonetheless, we all know what he's capable of. And not only offensively, but defensively, he showed that he is capable of being that long-term catching solution for the New York Mets, a catching position that has been very lackluster for a long time for the New York Mets. So Francisco Alvarez is here to save the day. But like I said, having a guy like Giovanni Rodriguez being one of those premier talents, like we said, top 10 of the top 50, coming over to the Mets organization provides a lot of flexibility. And I think that we all know as Mets fans that the Mets have an excess of talent in the infield, whether it's shortstop, and they've also signed a couple of shortstops as well there within the top 50. I think Raymel Ortiz is one of those that hasn't officially signed yet, so we'll kind of update you all on that when that comes in. But whether it's the shortstops or whether it's now the catchers, the Mets are going to have to flip some prospects in the near future, right? Now, a lot of people are talking about, well, Giovanni Rodriguez is only 16, 17 years old. There's no possible way that the Mets can predict his future and have him be a reason why Kevin Parada exits the organization. Well, even if the Mets didn't sign Giovanni Rodriguez, I really do think that if a team came calling for Kevin Parada in a trade for a solidified major league player, whether it's this offseason or next offseason, the New York Mets are in no position to say no. So I definitely agree with you. This just reinforces the idea that Kevin Parada might be expendable right behind Francisco Alvarez, who's here to stay. So I'm excited about the international free agent class. I hope the talent is a little bit more solidified than years past. Last year, the Mets signed 27 international free agents compared to this year's 20. But we all know it's quality over quantity when it comes to these classes, these international free agent classes. So hopefully the Mets hit the nail on the head with all these guys, and I can't wait to see what happens with these guys' future in the Mets system.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's quality over quantity sometimes. And using that international pool money smartly is the important aspect of it too. Not just using that international pool money to get more international free agents. You want to get the right free agents and what might fit your system. And again, this is not David Stearns, players here. They were signed early, or at least had agreements with a lot of these international free agents. So again, we don't know if Stearns likes these guys. We don't know that, but we do know one thing. This one catcher, I was reading up on him. He is very, very ahead of his years when it comes to his defensive metrics that I was looking at. And again, so young, so it's hard to really look into that and say, it's going to be good or bad because, Francisco Alvarez was supposed to be a bad catcher. So you really don't know. But what we do know is that even when the Mets drafted Kevin Parada, the best catcher coming out of the draft 2 years ago, I said to everybody, I'm like, this is a perfect scenario. And I thought, maybe Alvarez, who wasn't up yet, is the one that's going to be expendable because Kevin Parada was supposed to be well above his years. A college guy that was his bat was well put together when it came to what they were expecting. His defense was a little bit worrisome, but he got better, and they thought they can develop him. And I thought Alvarez might be on the chopping block, especially in the year when the Mets were one of the best teams in baseball in 22, that they would use Alvarez in the trade to get a big piece coming back to help this team push forward through a playoff run. And that really never happened. And now I'm thinking that Alvarez is probably established on this roster, and as hopefully the catcher for the next 10 years, you would think Parada is expendable. And teams love prospect catchers. For some reason, they love prospect catchers. If you look at a lot of the big trades that went around over the last 5 years, there's almost a catcher involved every single time in a blockbuster trade. So, and infielders, I know the Mets have a ton of them, but you know what? That's good because a lot of the time, teams like those infield prospects, especially the top infield prospects. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the Mets do. I don't expect Parada to be moved this offseason, but if it comes down where the Mets are in contention at the deadline and they're in or close to a playoff spot, you can use Parada to get a piece back on this team. And I'm not saying a bullpen piece. I'm talking about a bat, a starting rotation on whatever the Mets might need at the deadline. Kevin Parada can be expendable. I know we had a down year last year in the minor leagues, but everybody expects him to still be good. I believe he's actually out of the top 10 now in the Mets top 10 prospect list, but that's a good thing because that means that the Mets, what they brought in from the trade deadline and what, these international signings, I guarantee you're going to see at least one of them, maybe two, roll up in the top 15, maybe one in the top 10 shortly when the new updated top 10 prospect list comes up. And that's what I'm expecting when it comes to this farm system, because the farm system is getting better. And it's just getting better by day. And this is just going to make it even better. And again, all these guys are not going to be able to join this roster and help this team next year, this year, 2 years from now. You got to choose. And this, unfortunately, the Mets had to go through a transition through their front office, and that comes with evaluating the team and the players. And you know what? It's unfortunate because a lot of Met fans last year wanted Stearns, wanted changes, and with changes comes evaluation. No matter what the team looks like, evaluation has to happen. You can't just go in here and Stearns starts to, say, I want this guy, I want this guy, I don't want this guy, I want this guy out of here. And then it ends up being a debacle. And this is what happened with Billy Epler and, Brody when it came to the GM situation. You had Brody, Sandy, and then Epler, and they didn't like the guys that they brought in. So what did they do? They started changing, moving parts, and then you keep on having regime changes, and you're going to have different evaluations, different players that are going to be moved, and you see what happens when that happens. There's influx of changes and there's no stability. And I think what Stearns is trying to do here is evaluate the right players in the farm, the right players on this roster, and then, pull the trigger when he feels the time is right. So Parada is expendable? Yeah, I would think so in the right move. Now, the Marlins are looking like they're going to be doing a fire sale. If Stearns is looking and saying, hey, let's see what we can get. Maybe a Luis Arraez, he would be perfect for this Mets team. Putting him in, I don't think that can happen. But hey, you never know. They're not paying him, so he's expendable. Heard about Luzardo, maybe Cabrera as well in their rotation. So maybe Parada is expendable. We know the Marlins like Beatty as well. You can package Parada and Beatty maybe for a big-time blockbuster trade going back to the Marlins and get a couple, maybe a pitcher and maybe Arraez. Who knows when it comes to what Stearns is thinking here. But when it comes to Kevin Parada, you're 100% right. I think he is expendable. So I think we can both agree with that in the aspect. Yeah, buddy, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, you're good. I completely agree with you. I think that it's something, whether we had these international free agent signings or not, that was going to happen by default anyways. But I think something that I think I see a comment here from my guy Dan Bartels here. If you don't know who Dan is, make sure you go check him out on X and Instagram. I did a True Mets Talk live with him last week. Make sure you go check that out on my channel as well. Definitely knows he's talking about here. He was saying it's weird to see Yency Rivas get a higher pick and 450,000 less than Edward Lantigua, who is number 41. Both are shortstops. Do you think it's a long-term Lindor replacement? And like I said, first of all, I want to check that. Is Lantigua an outfielder or a shortstop? I could have sworn he was an outfielder, but
Yeah, good. I'll look for it.
But regardless, though, we're talking about kids that are 16 to 17 years old right now coming into the system. And we're talking about guys that are 5 to 6, maybe even 7 years away from the actual, from the major leagues. And same thing happened with Ronnie Mauricio, right? I mean, he got signed at 16 years old, had a couple $1 million signing bonus, right? If I remember correctly. And we haven't seen him, we didn't see him all the way until the latter part of 2023. So we can never project accurately when these kids are going to come up. So it would be hard for me to say that he's a Francisco Lindor replacement, but the discrepancy between the signing bonuses here is something of note too, from 31 to 41, which is interesting catch by Dan here. So I just want to shout that comment out. And thank you for tuning into the podcast as well. But yeah, that's why I said, like, it's really hard to project these kids in terms of what they're going to be and who the replacements are going to be. Like, I'm not confident in anybody being Francisco Lindor's shortstop replacement right now when we still have about, 7 to 8 years of him left on the team, which creates even further sort of turmoil in terms of having an excess of infielders and shortstops in the system. We talk about Jet Williams, Luis Angel, and their capabilities up the middle, Colin Houck. The list goes on and on and on. And it's just interesting to sort of project that. But it's a fun day. It's January 15th. We're still in the midst, right in the middle of the off season. And it's just something fun to talk about here, on this holiday while we're talking up here, Mets baseball. And it's fun to sort of sit here and project and try to talk about who's expendable versus who's not. But at the end of the day, I don't even think this front office knows as of right now. They're not going to rely on, to the counterpoint of anybody be expendable right now. I don't think they're relying on a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid that they just signed to be that right now in their minds of making someone else expendable, if that makes any sense at all. So it's fun to talk about the projections of it, but it is a little bit more difficult when you take that into consideration of the full scope. So that's all I got for.
Yeah, and it's not Juan Soto getting signed internationally, so I mean, they might be, who knows, but it's that's a needle in a haystack when it comes to those type of players. But yeah, I tend to agree. And when it comes to speaking about internationally, Starlin Marte, who is a guy that was very, very, very much missed in 2023, who was the biggest spark plug in 2022, and was probably the most important player on the roster in the lineup in 2022. And you see how much the lineup and the offense missed Starlin Marte last year. He is playing extremely well in the Dominican Winter League right now. He's batting 367, OPS of 872 in 8 games. Started 3 games in a row in the outfield, played the entire game. He's bunting, he's stealing, he's hitting for well above average. And again, I'm not going crazy that he's going to bat 360, in Major League Baseball, but just to see that he's doing everything that we've seen him do in 2022 prior to his injuries, and doing it in the Dominican Winter League. And I already said this, if you get half of what you got from 2022 Marte in 2024, it's a tremendous upgrade. And again, I don't know what he's going to be. He is 35 years old. Can he play 130 games? And I think the Mets are going to be very smart, is why they got a Tyrone Taylor, a Harrison Bader, and why they got guys that can platoon in different parts of the outfield. The fact of the matter is they're going to give Marte rest. He might play 2 days, rest 1 day, maybe DH 1 day, keep him off his feet in the outfield, because I don't know if they're concerned about him too much defensively, not putting him in the right field as much, but they want that bat in the lineup. They want him in the top part of the lineup. He was probably the clutchest and the most, I would say, the biggest spark plug in that lineup when he was batting second. I mean, it was Nimmo, Marte, Lindor, Alonso was one of the best 1 through 4 in baseball in 2022. Look at the numbers. They were just perfect. I mean, once you get past 4, it was a problem in 2022. But Chris, if Marte can be healthy, and I'm not saying be an all-star, play 150 games, but if you can keep that bat in the lineup, and I think that's why the Mets might not go. We'll talk about the DH a little later, but they might use Marte a lot more at DH than we probably thought about. If we can keep Marte healthy and keep that bat in the lineup, there's no reason why you can't expect him to do what he's been doing his entire career, batting close to 300, giving you 25 home runs. I think you can get that from Marte, Chris.
Yeah, I think so too. Like I said, I mean, he could be the DH possibly on days that he needs off because we saw him in 2023 out there in right field. It just looked like he wasn't right. I mean, it just looks like some plays, he wasn't getting to those balls that he was getting in 2022. And it was just an obvious discrepancy in terms of his health between 2022 and 2023. Listen, when Marte is, at his best, at his peak, you can probably get upwards of 20 home runs from him. You can probably get a couple of that with the stolen base threat. Like you can get good production out of him, but we can't expect that full throttle 2022 type Marte to just magically reappear in 2024. So like you said, a fraction of 2022 would be even better for this lineup in terms of how they're actually projected, in terms of their success in 2024. Would be awesome. That's something that type of production would make this lineup light years ahead of what everyone's projecting them to be right now.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm not expecting him to be an everyday DH, and I'm not really expecting him to be any sort of protection behind Pete Alonso. When we talk about DH is still on the market, I think that whatever we've said on this podcast, on these live streams, whether it's on your channel here or on my channel, the True Mets Talk podcast, none of that negates what the Mets need in a DH this offseason in terms of a free agent. They still need to go get that bat in my eyes. Whether they do or not, or they go in-house is another question, and that's only up to the front office to decide. But if it was up to me to decide, just putting on my GM hat here, then I'm going to go sign a free agent DH all day long. Yeah, right here, Marte 275, 19 home runs and 75 RBIs. I'll take that all day, Joel. Honestly, I'm going to take even less than that. I take 270, 15 home runs, and 75 RBIs can remain consistent. Like, even that part of Marte's game, I'll take. It's going to be interesting to see where the Mets hit him in the lineup, because right now he's projected to hit 5th right behind Pete Alonso, and I quite simply just can't see that being like an option. Like, if the Mets want to win ball games and they want to maximize production from the middle of the order, I don't think Marte is a 5th hitter anymore like he was in 2022 for the New York Mets. And that begs the question, right, with Francisco Alvarez. I don't think he's ready to be that player either at the 5th spot. So who do you really throw in there? That is something that the Mets have to figure out, because Mark Vientos isn't that guy either. You know what I mean? Like, there's not one single player right now in the Mets, either system or on this roster right now, in the 40-man roster, that I can confidently say I want to throw him right there behind Mr. Pete Alonso in the 5th spot. Like, that's feasible anyway. That's realistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. And see, that's the problem. This team has been missing a 5-hitter. Now, they're hoping it's Alvarez, but you can't throw Alvarez there. Look, he hit 25 home runs last year, but he batted 209. So that means he didn't put the bat on the ball a lot. When he did, he connected. Now he got better later in the season, a little bit more contact, but you can't have a hitter bat 209 batting 5th behind Pete Alonso, because even though Alvarez is a home run threat, they rather face Alvarez over Pete Alonso. So Pete Alonso is not going to get exactly a lot to hit. You need a guy, and again, I wish Marte would be the 5th hitter, only because I know that he can be a 300 hitter, and I would rather have a guy that's batting 280 behind Pete Alonso than a guy that can just hit home runs and not have a high average. I think that is a little bit more worrisome for a pitcher. But I think Marte's, they're going to put him back in the tool. But then again, Carlos Mendoza with these new analytics that your best hitter should be batting 2nd, and you saw with the Yankees, Aaron Judge is batting 2nd a lot, and usually your best hitter is batting 3rd or 4th. That's where I'm not sure where this lineup's going to be, because I would not be shocked on opening day Pete Alonso's batting second. And the whole analytical guru nerds are going to say, well, he gets an extra at bat. You want your guy to come up in the first inning, your best hitter, which makes sense. I don't like it, but that's the way the trend is. If you look at a lot of baseball now and a lot of the teams that use analytics, life or death, they're having their best hitters batting second. And I don't want Pete Alonso batting second. I think that's a bad idea. But what are you gonna do, Chris? And if you do that, now you do have options. I was just thinking about it. Maybe it's not such a bad idea, considering the fact that now you can bat Lindor third. You can have somebody else clean up, maybe an Alvarez or a Marte with Nimmo leading off. You got a lot of different options there. So I don't know if the new analytics and kind of the Yankee thought process with Mendoza and the analytics team and Stearns is another one. If you look at the Brewers lineups, their best hitters were bunched up at the top of the order, early part of the top of the order. And that's what I worry about because, it could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. I guess you have to play it out to see. But if it doesn't work, I don't see, they don't change much past the analytics if it's not working. They continue to do the same thing, Chris.
This is something that I have an issue with in terms of the Mets lineup as it currently stands. This is what I have an issue with. And listen, I understand the Mets offense looked decent in 2022 when they won 101 games, and we saw it falter there in the wild card series against better pitching with the San Diego Padres, right? The way the Mets lineup is set up right now is trying to mimic a 2.0 2022 Mets lineup with this small ball, right? You have your home run hitters in Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso in the middle of the lineup, and then who are you going to surround them with? A Starling Marte, a Jeff McNeil, a Brandon Nimmo, who we've seen power go up, but we'll see if that remains consistent or not. Like, I get that small ball still definitely should be a part of the game, and I get that the pitch counts and driving pitch counts up should definitely still be something that they focus on, right? Because I think they got away from it a little bit in 2023. But I want to see this lineup start to get to a point where they don't need to rely on that small ball. They don't need to rely on hitting ground balls in the hole. I want to see line drives in the gaps and line drives over the fence. I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but I do think the Mets lineup outside of a Francisco Lindor and a Pete Alonso has been lacking that power that we've so desperately needed, especially when we go up against teams like the Braves or the Dodgers, etc. You know what I mean? Even the Phillies, they hit the home run ball at a nice clip too with Schwarber, Harper, Castellanos, the whole 9 yards there, right? So I think that's something that I want to see the Mets get more toward. And like I said, I know that you have Nimmo aiming to be a little bit more of a power hitter. And we'll see with the presence of Drew Gilbert coming up through the ranks. We'll see if Nimmo's approach remains the same in terms of trying to be that power hitter, presumably with more of a line drive hitter coming up in Drew Gilbert. Not to say that Drew Gilbert can't put the ball over the fence, because he certainly can, but he's more gap to gap and an occasional home run than he is home run heavy, right? So another guy like Vientos, I'm not questioning whether Vientos can hit 20 to 25 home runs for this team, but I'm not relying on it, right? We haven't seen it yet, and we just don't know. We don't want to rely on that. So we talk about guys like, let's just say Nimmo gets back to his 2022 self. Lack of power there. Jeff McNeil, lack of power. Starling Marte, presumably lack of power. Harrison Bader, lack of power. Like, we need to start prioritizing these home run bats, which is why I've been lobbying for a guy like Justin Turner, because he can do both for you. He's a gap to gap hitter that'll get you 20 plus home runs easy. In my mind, easy. And I think that we need to start sort of expecting that or calling for that if we're Mets fans. But I'm not sure what they do with the DH spot here, because we've seen these numerous reports of, well, the Mets have budgetary constraints. Oh, wait, the Mets are in on Jorge Soler now if his asking price drops. Like, we just don't know as Mets fans talking up here and speaking about this team what they're going to do in terms of their budgetary cap. Like, we know that this team should go out and get a DH externally, right? But we just don't know if they're going to do so. So like I said, the Mets lineup is probably in a better spot than we all probably give them credit for, given on what Beatty and Marte does, or do, I should say. But still, they're lacking that power bat, and it's going to be in the 5th spot, and I just cannot reasonably see any sort of rationale in terms of having Marte back consistently fifth in 2024. Pete Alonso doesn't deserve that. Francisco Lindor doesn't deserve that. They deserve a hitter that pitchers are going to be scared of when they have to face Pete Alonso coming up with, let's say, 2 outs and 2 runners on, right? Pitchers right now are comfortable pitching around Pete Alonso in that sort of situation because who's behind him? The Mets have to force other teams' hands and put someone capable of striking fear into opposing pitchers' hearts right behind those two guys. Because right now, the way it stands, the Mets lineup is simply not scary. It's serviceable, but it's not scary.
Yeah, and
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And you know what? We'll skip over the Blake Snell rumors and we'll put it together with the bullpen targets. Sure. But let's bring up the more of the lineup with the DH, which we're looking for that fifth hitter in our lineup behind Pete Alonso. How much? I mean, Pete Alonso you would just assume with a little bit of a better hitter. We don't, say it just a power bat, somebody that brings fear to a pitcher and say, wow, if I walk Alonso, this guy can take me deep. And, a solo home run turned into a 2-run home run, and now it's a game changer, right? And how better would Pete Alonso be if he had that protection in the lineup? Would he hit 10 more home runs? Would he see 2 or 3 more balls over the plate a game? That can make a difference of him hitting 50 home runs a year. And that's a game changer. How many home run games did the Mets lose this year early on in the season that could have made differences? I know, that's not directly always that time in a lineup, but you see it all the time that, this game came up and look, Pete Alonso basically was trying to do too much because he was trying to reach for a slider outside, that he was trying to get to because he knows after him, it's going to struggle. And that's the problem that the Mets had, even in 2022, even though Canna was serviceable and other guys were serviceable behind him, and the lineup was just doing its thing in 2022. They had to string together 3-4 hits many times to get a couple of runs in, because after Alonso and Lindor, there wasn't much power there, and Nimmo wasn't the power hitter he was in 2023 2022 that he was in 2023. So that's where I'm really, really concerned about with the Mets right now. And I think the rumors when it comes to Soler, I think is a little bit more factual, only because of the fact of David Stern's track record. 3 things: power, pitching, defense. That's what he's always done with the Brewers. He never pivot from those 3 things ever. He would rather lose a little bit of average and put more power in the lineup, because one swing in the bat could change the ball game. And look, I'm all for average, and I've always been that way. I think power. Look, the Mets hit more home runs in 2023 than they did in 2022, and they won 75 games. So I think there's a lot of ways to win in baseball, and I know it leans towards having more power in your lineup to win ball games, but you see it all the time in the playoffs, right? The Phillies' downfall was when they didn't hit home runs in the playoffs, they lost. They could not score runs. The Rangers, even when they won the World Series, the power basically pushed them into a championship. But if you look at the entire playoffs, they got a lot of big hits that weren't home runs either. They had guys that were batting 260, 270, 280. Not a lot of guys that were batting 210. They had the best average in baseball amongst all the teams. And that was the big reason why I thought they were that lineup was so good, because not only did they provide power, but almost everybody in their lineup batted over 260 with they put the bat in the ball. And when you put the bat on the ball, you make the defense have to make plays. And not all the time that happens, Chris. And that's what I'm saying when it comes to that. And I don't 100% agree with you on the power aspect, which, look, you can win a lot of ways. Do I want more power? Absolutely. I think this team needs a little bit more power instead of relying on Lindor and Alonso. And, even though Alvarez can hit 25 home runs, but again, if he's batting 210, that's not going to do nothing. I'm telling you right now, it's everybody loves Kyle Schwarber until he strikes out and he doesn't put the bat on the ball, because if he doesn't hit a home run, he strikes out. And that's what I worry about with Francisco Alvarez. I need him to bat at least 240 to make me feel comfortable putting him behind Pete Alonso, because he's just another one of those batters that don't put the bat on the ball, and when he does, he'll hit the ball over the wall. But it's few and far between, Chris. And I agree with you with the power because this team needs another power bat. But I think David Stearns is going to provide that. I don't think he trusts Vientos either. I think he's just walking the company line right now, just saying all the right things. But I think deep down, and I truly think that David Stearns is in on one of those bats, even if it is Martinez, Turner, or Soler. Any one of them would help this lineup tremendously. But the fact of the matter is, that's why I like Turner too. Like, honestly, like, would I cry about Soler? Absolutely not. But Turner is the guy that I think just fits everywhere. He puts the bat on the ball behind Pete Alonso. He can sneak in a home run every now and then. And remember, the gap hitter, you know how many balls he hit the right center last year that should have been over the wall in most ballparks, but not Fenway Park? He could have easily had 28 home runs this year. And him batting close to 300, man, he's just perfect. And I know the age, Chris, but yeah. I give me one of those guys. Because if you go into 2024 with either Vientos or Alvarez behind Pete Alonso, it's a lot of hope than actual confidence in those two guys protecting Pete Alonso.
Yeah, and I'm not saying the Mets have to stock up on like 40-plus home run guys all throughout the lineup. That's not what I'm trying to get at. And I think Carlos is saying here, he said CP, fair enough. Pete not having protection behind him doesn't excuse him chasing every freaking outside slider that he's been pitched. That's on him, regardless of who's hitting behind him. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the Mets are just not and have not been a good situational hitting team. Like they were in 2022, even though there's a lot of times where I saw them runner on third, less than 2 outs, just hit the ball the other way. If they're giving you the run, just hit the ball the other way. And they just refuse to do so. It'd either be a strikeout or it would be a pulled outside pitch, and they just roll over to the shortstop or the third baseman, and they can't get the ball in, the runner in. And the same thing with that San Diego Padres series. Situational hitting just wasn't a part of the Mets' agenda. And that's the same thing with Pete Alonso here. Now, I won't discredit Pete Alonso's mindset. This is a genuine question that everybody has to ask themselves when we watch this Mets team and Pete Alonso is coming up to bat. In a big situation, knowing who you have behind you with 2 outs, let's say, with runners in scoring position, are you more inclined to expand that strike zone as a hitter, knowing that you're supposed to be this guy to go up there and drive these runs in and presumably not take a walk to leave it up to a guy like McNeil or Marte to go and ground out to end the inning? I'm not saying that is the right mindset to have, but you can't not think of what's going through their heads going up to the plate there. So, like I said, situational hitting, it's all about situational hitting. That's why I agree with you. We're in complete agreement here. What does Justin Turner do well? Well, he hits the ball at a high percentage rate in terms of the average, right? He's a gap-to-gap line drive hitter. But what does he also do well? He also can hit the ball over the fence. Listen, if Pete Alonso hit 35 home runs or even 30 home runs and he sacrificed 10 home runs on the season to hit 270, 280, I'd take that all day long. I'd make that trade all day long. I'd take that difference in average and mitigate those 10 home runs, because over the longevity or over the course of those differences in averages, you're going to get a lot more run production than any of those home runs will get you anyways. I completely agree with that. So that's why I'm advocating a guy like Justin Turner to be added to this squad instead of waiting for Mark Vientos, who's known to be a high strikeout hitter with a high strikeout percentage, even though he can put the ball over the fence at a great clip. That's a give or take situation. Same thing with Jorge Soler. Although he doesn't strike out a ton like other people like to say he does, I think he's at around, I want to say 26%. League average is around a little bit over 24. So he does strike out more than league average, but it's not egregious like a Teoscar Hernandez, who's at 31%. And I think Joel is saying in here, Teoscar Hernandez got $23.5 million to the Dodgers. What is Jorge Soler expecting? You know what I mean? So it's something where we have to take into consideration what the budget is for the New York Mets. If there's any sort of budget, we can pretty much guarantee that they're going in-house, because this team, from the pitching perspective, which I know we'll get into the Blake Snell rumors here in just a second, needs if they need another starter, if they don't need another starter, that's definitely your own opinion, because I think they could definitely benefit from another starter. But let's just say they're done with the starters. They definitely need another bullpen piece or two. So when you take into consideration all these reports that we've been seeing, there's so much conflicting reports out here. It's not even funny. But like I said, you cannot leave it up to Mark Vientos or DJ Stewart to bat behind Pete Alonso, or even Starling Marte for that matter. I'm going to sit here and say that 20 times, and I can say even maybe 20 more times so everyone gets that through their head. Like Mark Vientos, it's going to be great to see what he has over the course of 162, and I'm not opposed to getting young players their opportunity and their advantageous at bats, because we need to see that out of Mark Vientos. But honestly, personally speaking, if you've been listening to any sort of Mets talk from me on my channel, whether it's up here on the Hot Stove Live or the Interstate Mets Report or my own podcast that I do, I've basically told everybody from the start, I'm not convinced that Mark Vientos is the right fit for the New York Mets in general. Like defensively or offensively. I don't think that he's part of the larger scale plan that the Mets have. So is it worth it to get to see what he has if he's eventually going to be traded down the line? This is obviously, like, presumably speaking, I don't have any facts to support this, but from my point of view, with everybody coming up, having a solidified position on this team, and Mark Vientos not having that, he's a little bit more expendable than a guy like whoever's coming up, Jet Williams, Acuna, Gilbert, all those guys, even Mauricio, because Mauricio proved that he can go out there and play second base at an efficient rate. Like, we've seen that. We haven't seen Mark Vientos thrive in any position, maybe besides maybe some backup first base. So, like I said, maybe the Mets truly do. Maybe David Stearns really does go in-house, and because this is a true bridge year and they don't want to go after a Jorge Soler on a 2-year deal or JD Martinez on a 2-year deal, or they don't want to take at bats away from Vientos because maybe, just maybe, he might be the future DH of this team. Like, this is a lot of maybes we're talking about here, right? And I think us as fans don't like to talk in the maybe category. We like to talk objectively. This guy, XYZ, whoever it is, makes the team better than XYZ that's in-house. And that's just a simple fact of, if you're talking about DH for this team, that's the situation that we have on our hands right now.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with the fact that, I don't believe Vientos is that guy either. And Vientos is not a Stearns type of player. Like, he doesn't like those type of players. He doesn't like non-versatile players at all. Like, you can't do, again, this is why Vogelback is not back. This is why, guys who are very one-dimensional, if you look at everybody on this roster so far, every one of them is versatile, minus Alvarez, who is the catcher, right? That, you don't expect your catcher to play 2 or 3 different positions, but everywhere on the infield, even Pete Alonso, that, you wouldn't think is versatile, but if you really check, I know it was back in the day in college, he played a little bit of third base. Like, there's aspects to Stearns's, I guess, genius where he loves versatile players, because if you get an injury, you're not worried about, oh my God, I got to take a guy from the farm system that is probably not that good or not ready yet. A guy, hey, this guy's on the bench, he could play this. Or a guy that isn't, a guy like Marte can, move to left field, or a guy like Nimmo, who's playing left field. If Beta gets hurt, you move him back to center. There's so many different ways you can look at it here. And I think that's important to realize. And I do think I would love to be a fly on the wall right now in David Stearns' office, because I really would want to know. Because if the $10 million budget isn't true, then guess what? The Mets are going to do something. If it's in the pitching market or it's in the DH market, they're clearly going to do something. I think they're going to go get another starter, and I obviously think they're going to get at least one more bullpen on, most likely a lefty. And this is where, like, there's no one direct, like, lane they're going in, because either you're going to go somewhat all in for your lineup or somewhat all in on your pitching, either bullpen or starter. You got to choose one, because right now the pitching is in between and the lineup is in between. It's very hard to win that way, because you can't trust either one of these going into the season as of right now, the way the roster looks, Chris. And that's why I think maybe they are looking at Blake Snell, because they did talk to Blake Snell. Maybe they are saying, listen, we're not going to give you a 7-year deal. We're not going to give you that $250 million that the report came out that's what Boris was starting with, like an 8-9 year deal, 270. I mean, if you give that to Blake Snell, put that guy in an insane asylum because he should be fired on the spot. Maybe he says, hey, listen, we'll give you a high AAV short term deal here. We'll work with that. And, even if it's like the $40+ million over 2 years, maybe Snell will do that, maybe not. But they have to put their foot down either on the pitching side or the offensive side. And either one would make me okay. Like if you want to focus more on the pitching, focus more on the pitching as the rest of this offseason if you're not going to go get a DH bat and make it in-house. Because I can't go into this season, and I don't think they believe they can go into the season not at least feeling somewhat confident in either side of the baseball on the field, offensively or defensively, pitching wise. You have to choose one. The defense looks good, but if the pitching's getting rocked, the defense really does not matter that much. So that's where I really wonder that around the same time, it was Justin Turner. Oh, now the rumors with Martinez. Now the rumors with Soler now. And now you heard all of a sudden Blake Snell after the Yankees ran away from his asking price and other teams ran away from his asking price. Maybe the market does come back to the Mets pitching wise, and maybe they will, jump in last minute for Blake Snell when it's getting closer and closer. I think we're 30 days away from pitchers and catchers. It's getting closer and closer now, and these players are going to want it, especially the pitching. Pitchers need to get into spring training when they're supposed to get to spring training. I think that is something that I think most pitchers want. But I mean, Chris, at some point they got to choose here, because if they walk into this season, the pitching the way is maybe they get one bullpen arm. Say if they get two bullpen arms, a lefty and a righty, quality arms. Yet the starting pitcher is what it is, and the lineup is what it is. Vientos is your DH. What do you have confidence in? Because right now I don't have any. Either one. What can win you a ball game? Can pitching? Can the lineup? You're trusting for a lot of hope. And I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I don't know if you are.
Yeah, you're not only looking for a lot of hope in terms of the talent aspect for one of those position groups to win you a ball game or lock it down when you have the ball game, the lead in the ball game, but you're also hoping and expecting a lot of hope in terms of these guys all staying healthy, right? Because injuries do happen, and as much depth as the bullpen has, right, and all these signings that we've seen on two-way contracts or minor league deals, I'm not sure the Mets are set up in a position in terms of great depth outside of that, right? The starting rotation. I mean, they have Buto and McGill and Peterson coming back, but are you really confident in those options if, say, Luis Severino goes down with an injury again? Because I'm sure as hell not any single one of those guys. I think maybe out of those guys, I'm most confident in Jose Buto, which is pretty sad to say the least. Same thing with the offensive side of the ball. If Harrison Bader goes down, God forbid, I hate to speak about potential injuries here, but let's not act like these guys haven't been injured that we're naming here for at least the last couple of seasons, predominantly. Then who steps in? Are you going to rush Drew Gilbert to come in? Or are you going to rock with Tyrone Taylor and DJ Stewart starting in your outfield? That is something that the Mets do have to question themselves. And I'm not saying that every team out there, every championship team has all the depth in the world, right? They're relying on these starters to stay healthy and provide them the bulk workload of games played and innings played. But it is definitely a concern, right? Especially if you don't get a DH, if you don't get those two bullpen arms like we've been clamoring for, if you don't get another starter, it gets very worrisome because the Mets don't have the best injury history. Let's just face it. Let's call a spade for what a spade is. The Mets do not have the best injury history. And I see a lot of people here saying, I think Carlos said Soler for a 3-year deal. I don't want to just give Soler a 3-year deal for the sake of giving him a 3-year deal. Soler's a guy that's hit 20 plus home runs only in 3 of his 10 seasons, right? The consistency in Soler's numbers aren't great. 2021, we're talking about 27 home runs and he hit 223. He hit 250 last season with 36 home runs. That definitely plays for the DH category, but what are we going to get in terms of consistency? And we're talking about, I think he projected him at 20.5 million, not to sort of go after Carlos's take, because I certainly would be happy with Soler if he signed today. Absolutely. I'm not going to say he's not, but when we talk about consistency, is Soler going to be dependable over those 3 years? That's something that the front office has to gauge whether they're going to go into that. But regarding these Blake Snell rumors, like you have here up here highlighted right underneath me, I don't buy it, man. I simply don't buy it. I can't buy it. I dropped a video on this. I've been talking about giving Mets fans a warning about listening to these guys like Hector Gomez or like any other no-name reporter out there that has 200, 300 followers. No disrespect to you if you do, but that hasn't been linked to any sort of MLB insider sources. It hasn't gotten anything right as of yet. And we see more and more and more accounts popping up onto our timelines talking about Mets are interested in this, Mets are interested in that. Oh, well, if, quote unquote, if these players' asking prices do drop. Like, we're expected to sit here and believe that Blake Snell, who is probably wanting and asking for a 6 to 7 year deal with the New York Yankees, is automatically going to get rejected and go like, okay, fine, I'm willing to take a 2 or 3 year deal since the Yankees don't want me. Like, I'm not buying any of that until some more solidified reports come out. I think that it's not out of the realm of possibility that a guy like Jorge Soler or Blake Snell drop their asking prices compared to what they want at the beginning of the offseason, but we're certainly not at that point just yet. We're not at that point just yet. So like I said, like I don't think that there's as much desperation on these players' sides like we've been hearing within these reports. Now, like I said, 3 years, you give Blake Snell the AAV that he wants. Yeah, maybe that's a good get because you solidify. We talked about before Imanaga signed. Like we need another solidified guy. Presumably, we would like one that's on a little bit of a longer term deal because next year you're going to have the same problem in the rotation. So Blake Snell, 2-time Cy Young Award winner. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a scrub, but I'm not giving him a 6 or 7 year deal like he wants right now. So if his asking price, and that's a big if it comes down, sure, maybe the Mets are in play there. But I'm not buying it just yet. And I think a lot of people have to sort of decipher for themselves and have to be able to sort of go on Twitter or go on any social media platform and realize who's giving these reports, like who's actually behind these reports and is it credible or not. I'm not getting my hopes up for a Soler or a Snell. I'm just simply not until I hear otherwise. So, like I said, great players. They definitely would fit right into the Mets system. Like I wouldn't be opposed to any of those guys coming in here at the beginning of the rotation for Blake Snell, a 1-2 punch of Snell and Kodai Senga, or Soler dropping into that 5th spot right behind Pete Alonso. I would never sit there and complain objectively given what those guys have accomplished in the league, fitting them into the Mets roster somehow. I just don't think it's feasible right now. And I think that these reports are just using Mets fans as clickbait to drive their own agendas. Quite simple.
Yeah, and you know what? There's not a sense of urgency from the players to sign, and there's also not a sense of urgency from the teams to be willing to sign or cough up big time offers or contracts. Like this baseball offseason, not only has there been no sense of urgency from the player side or the team side, the reporters, even the reputable ones, have been so bad this offseason where you can't even, besides Will Salmon, Passan, like they're the ones that seemingly are in the know and have more than enough information to go out there, but they're not putting nonsense out there, like the Andy Martinos who needs to write a story for SNY or they're going to kick him to the curb. So he comes up with, what's going to rile up a fan base? He always going to mess with the Mets fan base, right? Oh, the $10 million, because he brought that up. Nobody else brought that up. Everybody quoted him. So, if Joel Sherman, who I don't really trust anymore, a John Heyman, a Passan, Salmon, guys like that, they didn't bring that out there. They didn't post that up there. They didn't find that out. Why Andy Martino had to bring that up right after they signed Sean Manaea. It seems like every time the Mets make a sign-in, Andy Martino comes out and says, well, you know what? This is not going to happen anymore. He always brings up something negative to dampen our expectations. And this is what I worry about as just a baseball fan. The fact of the matter is, we can't trust anything at this point. If you have 300 followers, 400,000 followers, 1 million followers, whatever, it's not trusted anymore. And this is why there needs to be a set period for free agents to sign, because we're going through the motions here and we're all looking stupid, even though our opinions aren't stupid. To some people they might be. Our opinions are out there, and what we believe should happen or will happen. It's such a basically a big mesh of a big mix of nonsense, and you get content like this that we're trying to figure out are the Mets doing. Are they going to spend more money? Are they not? Are they budget restraint? We just don't know. That's why, yeah, who wouldn't want Blake Snell? I know we don't want it for 7 years, but if you got him on this team, you're not going to worry about year 6 or 7. You're going to worry about year 1 and 2, right? That's the way we think as fans, right? Because I don't think anybody's thinking about the Lindor contract 6 years from now. They're worrying about what he can do now. You think Met fans who says pay Alonso anything, if they give him 10 years, $300 million, are you going to worry about year 8 through 10? No, you're going to worry probably about 1, 2, 3. And that's where we are as fans. Not, the Dodger fans, they knew they were getting everybody. So they were just sitting back, in their comfortable Southern California homes, enjoying the weather, knowing they were going to get everybody possible because the Dodgers set up for this. Now, what Met fans hope is that if they're not doing much in this offseason, is that they're setting up like the Dodgers set up last offseason and are going to be making, splash after splash, signing big trades and going all in for 2025 and beyond. If that's their plan, I'm okay with it. But guess what? As fans, we have to get through the 2024 season first. And that's why we're talking about, Soler, Turner, Martinez. Hey, yeah, that would be nice. Snell, Montgomery, that would be nice. But what are they really doing? Yes, they might have said kind of oddly that, it's a transition year, it's a bridge year. Yeah, that's fine. But when you also raise the prices of season ticket holders, I know that I had to pay at least $800 more for my season tickets. It's a lot of money. You can't throw this roster out here and say, well, 2024, oh well, you're not the Wilpons. And that's the issue that I'm having, Chris.
That's a hard sell to the fans. I completely agree with you, which is why I haven't bought into that sort of let's just throw this season away, because it's very blatant to Mets fans. And as I guess sort of irrational as we are sometimes, we're not dumb. That's what the Mets fan base isn't. I guess some people definitely behind their crazy takes have an agenda, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I think people have a firm understanding that, what type of Mets roster this is going to be at the end of the day, the way it shakes out. We can objectively call it either trash at the end of the day, and we know it's going nowhere. It could be a fringe wild card, or it could be a division winner. And I'm throwing away that last possibility because we're not winning the division with the way the first half of this offseason is shooken out. But I see a lot of people talking about, and Pastor Steven here, shout out Pastor Steve. Thank you for tuning into the live stream. And I think someone else agreed with him here. Signing Soler to a multi-year deal just means that, if he doesn't pan out and he's not consistent, the Mets can just trade him. And Pastor Steve isn't the only one that said this to me. Someone was arguing with me on my Twitter account the other day that we should go sign a Jordan Hicks before he signed, or we should go sign an Aroldis Chapman before, or he hasn't signed yet, but we should go sign all these premier bullpen pitchers, because even if the Mets don't need all of them, they can just go ahead and trade them and flip them at the deadline. Listen, there's a reason why the Mets presumably haven't been able to trade Starling Marte. As much as they probably have wanted to, maybe, they're not going to be able to trade that contract, right? Coupled to the fact that he's going to come back and probably ride out this contract to begin with. But a team like the Phillies, who gave Nick Castellanos 5 years, $100 million, we've been hearing rumors about a potential trade market for him, and the Phillies may be letting him go. He's making $20 million a year over the next, 2-3 years? What team is going to want to have that on their payroll? We saw it with Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer. Although the $40 million a year is a little bit excessive, I get that these players are not going to be signing for $40 million a year. Steve Cohen had to take money and eat money off that contract out of his own pocket. So these players who are getting $20+ million a year, not all of these teams are able to take on that full brunt of a cap hit. And yeah, we did it with Tommy Pham and David Robertson. We didn't have to pay Jack Squadron contracts because they're on a 1-year deal worth $10 million or less. I think Tommy Pham was even less than $10 million of the New York Mets. That's why we were able to sell him off to a low market team or a smaller market team like the Arizona Diamondbacks and didn't have to pay anything of his contract. The contracts do matter. Like if you go sign Soler for 3 years, $20 million, even $21 million, and you want to flip him next season, maybe there's a more attractive DH or somebody else comes on the market, like a Juan Soto. You want to put Juan Soto at the DH spot, then that's a contract that you're gonna have a hard time moving. I think a lot of people don't realize that. They're like playing MLB The Show. Like, it's not MLB The Show, people. Not every team is going to be able to take on $20 to $25 million AAV. That's all I'm saying. And I get it. Like, that's probably like if I was playing at MLB The Show, hell yeah. Let me go sign the entire free agent market and flip them for prospects like we did this last season. That's great and all fine and dandy, but it's just not feasible. It's not feasible. And at that point, you go into the whole merry-go-round of why the Mets are in this position in the first place. They've already been there and they've done that. And this is the reason why we have to sit up here and talk about the Mets not signing any free agents this season, because they've been there and they've signed these players to 3-4 year deals like Justin Verlander or Max Scherzer. They signed them to those 3-year deals worth the high AAV. They were going for it all, and they missed out on it. And that's what happens naturally. Even when you have the richest owner in baseball, the salary cap does catch up to you, and these owners are not going to want to pay in excess of $100 million of luxury tax every single season. Sorry, I know a lot of people already know that, and I may be going on a tangent, and maybe those weren't even the people in the comments' original sort of thoughts, but I just needed to say that because, like, regardless if it's on here on YouTube, I've seen a lot of that discourse happening on Mets Twitter, and I just have to debunk that because that's just not feasible.
Yeah, and Lonnie brings, the Dodgers spent $1,000 for free agents. Yeah, but what the Mets are claiming they're going to be doing in 2020 in this offseason in 2024, the Dodgers did the same exact thing. Is to why they spent $1 billion. And let's not forget that the deferred payments on Ohtani's contract allowed them to do that. If Ohtani says, "Listen, I'm not taking any deferments. I want $70 million a year," they would have never got. They never would have been on Yamamoto because nobody was expecting them to be in on Yamamoto once they signed Ohtani, because they thought $70 million a year, that's a lot of money. Yeah, they might have traded for Glass now, but they would have never been on Yamamoto. And Lonnie, I understand what you're talking about, but look what the Dodgers did last year. They signed Martinez to be their DH, and that was it. They let Trey Turner go to the Phillies, and that was a move that was a little shocking because everybody thought that the Dodgers would try to keep Turner, and they didn't do that. They didn't spend a lot of money at all last year. And Dodger fans, and I remember this because I have a couple of Dodger fans I went to college with, and they were pissed. They were like, "What are we doing? Why are we wasting years of Mookie Betts and guys like that, and wasting years of the best players in baseball with Freddie Freeman and stuff like that as well?" And you wonder why, and then you realize they took a chance on doing not much in 2024 and hoping they had a good year. Even though the Dodgers are probably going to make the playoffs, I can assure you right now, they were not expecting the season they had during last season. They were not expecting that because the fans were not expecting that. So if the Mets are doing that, they better spend a ton of money next year because there's money coming off the books. They're clearly setting up for 2025, but you still have to have a 2024 season. And Chris, I said this on a couple of hot stoves before and on my videos. They're on the wait and see approach. They're on a holding pattern right now. They're going into the season as a let's see what happens in the first half, because they do have a lot of tradable contracts right now going into the season. If they're not doing well and not really looking like they're in a playoff position or close to a playoff position at the deadline, they're trading a lot of these contracts that are expendable, and you can probably get an asset or two. Like, look what we got for Tommy Pham and Canna. Like, it was actually, you can get stuff for guys that are desperate, teams that are desperate for certain types of players. There's always arms that are needed. If Manaea is having a good season, but again, if they are having good seasons, maybe the Mets are in a better position. I do think if the Mets are in contention at the deadline, they will make moves and be buyers. But if they're not doing well at the deadline, they will be sellers. And I think Stearns is setting up this first half in a holding pattern. And they'll strike when whatever is the necessary moves to make, depending on how they look in the first half, Chris. That's what I'm looking at right now. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. And, it's hard to, kill David Stearns in his first year as president of baseball ops, because he is an evaluator right now, because He didn't get any of these guys. He didn't sign any of these guys on the roster prior to taking this job. And that's where we are right now. And it's hard to kill him this offseason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not gonna go after David Stearns right now. He's 4 months on the job. Like he's taken over an organization that's in cap space purgatory. I've been saying that on all my live streams. I've been saying that on all my appearances here. Like I'm gonna evaluate David Stearns next offseason when he has the full arsenal at his helm. One thing here, I know Carlos, we've been kind of going back and forth in terms of why we would or wouldn't give Soler that long-term deal. The only thing that I'll say here is, and Carlos, if you don't know what comment I'm talking about, he said even if he's not confident in having him as his DH, he's going to be better than Vogelback or whoever else. He's a lot more confident than having Vogelback or whoever else the Mets have had. Other than Justin Turner, but he's confused on why I don't want or why I only want a DH for 1 year. So like this goes back to the wait and see part of your take, Rob, right? Like are the Mets really like we have DH options next offseason regardless? Like there's bats on the roster that can be that DH long term next offseason that we can sign. My thing is like if you go sign a Jorge Soler or a Justin Turner for a 1 year deal and you end up bombing the first half of the season and you want to do the same thing 2.0 that you did last trade deadline and gaining all those prospects, you're a lot more likely to get a haul back for a Justin Turner or a Jorge Soler on a 1 year deal than if they're on a multi-year deal, especially a Jorge Soler, right? Like even if the Mets signed Jorge Soler and the Mets were terrible at the trade deadline, by the trade deadline, I'd still want them to pursue options in terms of the trade market for a Jorge Soler. Like, and that's going to be feasible on a 1 year deal more so than a 3 year deal. And I know that that might not be the most popular of takes, and you're definitely certainly, free to agree with me. Like, I'm not expecting everyone to sit up here and agree with me. This is why I'm giving my takes, and I like reading the comment section about what you all think. But like I said, it's a wait and see type season. This first half is going to dictate what happens at the trade deadline, and that's going to dictate the second half of the season and what sort of prospects we see come up. Right? So like it's a ebb and flow process. Like we have steps in this process that the Mets are methodically taking. Like they've told us, don't expect us to be division winners. We're not going to go sign the cream of the crop this offseason, but we're going to be competitive. And they kept it open-ended like that because they're going to say, hey, if it comes to the trade deadline, the rationale for doing exactly what they did last season in terms of flipping these guys for prospects is like, hey, we signed XYZ prospect. You saw our prospect, or we signed XYZ free agent. You saw in the offseason. We tried to be competitive, and it didn't work out.
Yeah.
That's the rationale they're going to give us.
Without hurting the farm system.
Without hurting. Exactly. So, like I said, I'm just trying to sort of see 3 steps beyond what the Mets have already planned out. Like the Mets already have planned out that 3-step process. And I think a lot of fans, like, I'm not saying that we have any in the chat, but I'm saying a lot of fans, objectively speaking about the Mets, are only short-sighted. Like, why aren't we signing XYZ free agent? But I don't think they understand that it's a wait and see game till the trade deadline. And like it can't be a wait and see game at the trade deadline if you sign these guys for 3 to 4 years. Right. And I'm not saying that you have to go out and trade Jorge Soler because there's other guys you can trade if this season's a bust, like Sean Manaea on a nice little short-term deal. Someone would probably take a flyer on him. Maybe if Severino proves himself again in the first half and the Mets are terrible, they can go flip Severino for some nice prospects, a nice haul. But like I'm just trying to like maximize the Mets' return in the event that they don't pan out to what we all expect them to be. Now that being said, I will flip the other side of the script and sort of agree with you, Carlos. Like I'm in the full realm of let's contend. So that's why I'm like, I do want Jorge Soler on this team. Like, I'm not saying I don't want him on this team. I'm just saying, like, there's 2 sides of the fence to every story of why the Mets may not want to sign Jorge Soler to that 3-year deal. Like, if it was up to me, sure, let's go give him 3 years, opt out after the second, whatever. We have a long-term DH. I'm just trying to sit here and think of why the Mets wouldn't do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's a great point, and you know we're on the same turn, we're on the same page here when it comes to that, and the fact that it's funny because like you know we don't want to have a year like we had last year, even though there was high expectations going into last year, but by you know the end of June, you know we were doing constant weekly roundtables with nothing to talk about except bitching about this team and how much of a disaster it was. Like that's all we had to talk about. We didn't talk about oh you know that decision made in the sixth inning. Oh look at that great play. Oh that great at bat by this guy in the sixth inning or seventh inning. We weren't talking about that because the season was over. We don't want especially as content creators, you know. But as just fans, me having season tickets, I go to baseball games regardless. I go to City Field. I travel around the country every single year. I love doing it, regardless if they're good or not, because that's what I like to do. My year is based on the baseball summer. I save all my vacation for the baseball season so I can do what the hell I want during the baseball season and go to as many games home and road as possible because I love to do it. I don't want to go to games where I'm sitting there knowing that this is not a team that can make the playoffs. I don't want to do that no more. And it's hard for us now with Steve Cohen with his deep pockets wrapping our mind around that again because we didn't have to do that again after the Wilpons sold the team. And look, I was going to games, and you know, maybe I'm part of the problem because I go to games regardless of what they put on the product they put on the field because I love baseball. And you know what? We might have a miraculous season and a shocking year like 2015. Why can't the Mets do that? I mean, the Diamondbacks did. What expectations did they have? You know, maybe what Cohen says, hey, we're not going to have the expectations going into this year like we had the last two seasons. Well, yeah, but you know what? If a lot of these 1 year deals work out, guess what? It can be a very interesting summer. And we're all hoping for that. Chris, let's just finish up with the bullpen, so we can finish up the stream and you know get to our normal lives instead of complaining about this damn team again. Uh, the bullpen targets. I mean, we've been talking about this till the cows come home. We know we need a left-hander. We probably need two bullpen arms, but we're probably going to get one. So a lefty seems more likely. I put Aaron Loop um, a part of the thumbnail because I think that could be a possibility. I think he would love to come back to New York, even though he didn't have a good season last year. He had a decent season in 2022, but he wasn't what he was with the Mets for that 1 year. What do you do with the bullpen if they do anything? I think they're going to get another lefty. I mean, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it really is hard to gauge. I've mentioned Aaron Loop countless of times over here on my side as well. I think that a reunion might be pretty decent in terms of 1 year deal. He had an abysmal year last season. Obviously, we know the historic rate, the ERA that he produced in 2021 with the New York Mets, sub 1 ERA. I'm not saying that he's going to mimic any sort of similar production. From 2021, but it is certainly a type of deal that would fit right into the category of what the Mets have been doing so far in this offseason. So you have Aaron Loop out there. Joel's saying Matt Moore, same sort of deal here with Matt Moore on the market. Maybe if it's not a lefty, they'll go another righty. David Robertson's type of guy that's going to sign a 1 year deal, probably worth less than $10 million, right? Given what he did in the second half of last season. So there's a lot of options in terms of these short-term deals, these 1 year deals that you can sort of provide this Mets bullpen in the back end, right? Now, my thing is like, I would have loved to sign. I mean, honestly, Easy, if he's in the chat, like he's been lobbying for Jordan Hicks, and I said it's not feasible. And you saw what type of contract he got from the San Francisco Giants, and I'm predicting maybe Hector Neris is going to be the same way. Even though he's a little bit up there in age, I can see Hector Neris signing a 2 to 3 year deal, which might take the Mets out of things. So, and honestly, as much as I would love Wandy Peralta on this team, I think he's also in for maybe a longer term deal with his last 3 years of sample size coming from the New York Yankees has been great. So I think he inks himself a longer term deal. So yeah, Aaron Loop, David Robertson, Matt Moore, all these guys like Brent Suter is one that I now look in hindsight on his contract, 1 year, $3 million. And I was like, David Stern's connection, $3 million, 1 year. Why wasn't he like on the Mets' radar? So, yeah, I don't know. I think that Brent Suter would have been awesome, but hindsight's always 2020. It's on to the next guy. Yeah, I mean, Emizi, I know you think Nuri sucks. It's just simply not true. He's rejuvenated his career, maybe not to the standard that you want, or maybe the fit that you want with the Mets, but I think objectively he doesn't suck. But anyways, Hicks signed with the Giants, Joel, 4 years, $44 million.
Yeah, as a
Yeah.
starter, like they
As
promised
a
him.
starter, right? I mean, I don't think that pans out. I don't think that pans out. I don't think it's going to happen.
Mm.
I don't think he's going to be a starter long term, and that he's going to be back in the bullpen. That's just where I'm predicting him. Fujinami, also interesting. Yuki bringing up. There's a lot of good options that you can sign to short term deals, like still on the market. Now, is it going to be the names that everybody wanted at the beginning of the season? Probably not, right? We're probably picking from a way lesser pool here in sort of your tier even C guys at this rate. But I do think that a guy like Aaron Loop certainly plays. A guy like David Robertson certainly plays. And the budgetary constraints, if those things are true, what Martina reported, I'm not saying it's a hard cap at 10 million. And I don't think that if Steve Cohen and David Stern see a guy they like are going to budget themselves to 10 million, but you got to think somewhere in that ballpark. And I think that all these guys here that we just named, are definitely somewhere that the Mets that's feasible for the New York Mets this coming off season. But I would say, like, when we talk about if it's going to be another lefty, we also have to talk about the starting rotation projection because I'm not sure what they're going to do with Joey Lucchesi at this point. For me, I thought that Joey Lucchesi personally was going to be that sixth start in the rotation because I still do think they're going with the six-man rotation. But if they don't somehow, if they trust Kodai Senga to go every fifth day, if they trust Severino to stay healthy over the course of the season and go every fifth day, then maybe you might have another lefty in Joey Lucchesi coming out of the pen. Who knows? You never know. So it remains to be seen. It all depends. Like there's a lot of factors that come into play here. As always with this Mets front office, there's not a one size sort of like answer to everything. Like if you are thinking like with blinders on either side that this is just a clear get, you can be sure that it's not because the Mets have 1,000 different factors surrounding that decision that you think is obvious to make. So I just don't know at this point. Matt Moore, Aaron Loop, David Robertson, Fujinami is a name that I like as well. But yeah, I mean, we could talk about trades here too, but I don't think that there's any sort of guys at this point that would fit the bill of an eighth inning type setup man that would come cheap for the New York Mets. So I'm not projecting that. But I think a little bit of an underrated type thing, and I'm not expecting it to happen at the beginning of the season, is does Jorge Lopez can Jeremy Hefner get Jorge Lopez back to maybe a version that we
He
saw
was one
out
of the
of
best
Baltimore?
closers 2 years ago. Like that's
Absolutely.
something to look at.
That's huge. That's huge. So I'm like, I'm not writing Jorge Lopez off. Am I confident in that right now to begin the season? No. But if we sort of progress through the season and we see that, he's coming into his own, maybe a little bit of of his former self in Baltimore, absolutely he can be that guy for the eighth inning for the New York Mets. And maybe the Mets are projecting that. And also, 1 year deal, by the way. He can also be flipped at the trade deadline if things don't come to fruition as well. So I think the Mets are pretty set in terms of whatever route they tried to go and they expect to go. But here, I like to talk about the Mets in terms of if they're going to be competing as a playoff contender, as a wild card contender, right? I'm never going to try to sort of say we shouldn't get this guy because we're going to be tanking. Like I'm never going to go in that category. But it does have to cross your mind how all in terms of a playoff spot are the New York Mets' front office. Like I can't answer. You can't answer that. Nobody in this comment section can answer that. So I guess we'll see. But yeah, it's Ghost, man. Shout out to Ghost, Kodai Senga. I'll be rooting for him all the way. We'll see what happens if they get him that secondary sort of pitcher, whether it's via trade. I know we haven't talked about Dylan Cease. We haven't talked about my guy Freddie Peralta. We haven't talked about Jesus Luzardo and how that might impact a Brett Beatty. We talked about all of that on 2 Mets Hot Stove Lives ago, I believe it was, when we got into that with Nelson. So a lot of factors, like I said. And yes, MEZ, I understand that Jeremy Hefner is an overrated pitching coach, presumably. And I don't have any strong feelings towards this, but he has survived multiple regimes for a reason, right? So we can see that they value him for some reason, and that other teams were willing to trade for him. They also valued, those external teams valued him for a reason too. So I don't know what the infatuation is. Maybe that's not for me to know. Maybe that's not for us to know. But there is some sort of infatuation and tie to Jeremy Hefner with this Mets organization that maybe we can't see from the surface level.
Yeah, and either I tend to almost agree with you, but you know what? Nobody was talking about Jeremy Hefner in 2022 when Scherzer and DeGrom went down, and Peterson and McGill stepped up in this rotation big time. Nobody was giving any credit to Jeremy Hefner. They were giving credit to McGill and Peterson. So, and I know they both digressed last year, but again, nobody was talking about Hefner last, 2 years ago, and now they're talking about him again. And I agree with you. I don't think he's done a lot, but again, like Chris just said, there's a lot of teams that are willing to trade for him, and a lot of teams that are looking to go after Hefner. I think the Mets, he has that new, I guess, philosophy that a lot of organizations like, and that's why he's survived a couple of regimes already, like Chris said. So we'll see. And back to Suter for a second. Suter is also from Ohio, and he also said that he in a report from the Ohio whatever paper it was, saying that he was willing to take less money to go back home than taking a few $1 million to places that he wanted to be further from home. So I guess that might have been a reason as well. Lastly, Drew Gilbert and Luis Angel Acuna are going to be starting the year in AAA, Chris, and that's going to be very, very interesting because AAA, we know what it is. It's just they're just keeping them there until they're ready to get called up, and I think it's going to be very quickly, to be honest with you, because you don't put those guys in AAA to prove anything, because AAA isn't what it used to be. It's AA where you need to prove it. So they're just there to be closer to home. I know Binghamton, Syracuse, it's close, but to be in AAA for any reason, if Beatty starts off bad, watch out for Acuna. You could see somebody Acuna going to third, maybe in a situation like that. But I tell you right now, having Acuna and Gilbert in AAA tells me that the Mets are very confident that these guys are going to be called up rather shortly next year, in my opinion. And Jet Williams getting a spring training invite to the Major League Major League Baseball spring training, Major League spring training. That also tells me that Jet Williams, they're taking a hard look at him, because if Brett Beatty does not perform and Jet Williams does, would they give Jet Williams the job
in 2024?
Yeah, because why give him the spring training invite to the Major League Baseball part of spring training? That's because they didn't do that for Gilbert or Acuna.
They've also done that with Alex Ramirez for a couple seasons too, though, right? Haven't they? So there's two sides of the argument. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, though. You know my stance on this.
The only reason why I said that, and sorry to cut you off, but because they already said Acuna and Gilbert to AAA and didn't really say where they're going to put Jet Williams, they might think that he's already past Acuna and Gilbert, who are probably right on the cusp of being ready. Like, I think they think Jet Williams is probably the closest being ready as a position player. And I think they want to push. I think another reason why they might want to be pushing Brett Beatty a little bit, giving him a little competition at third base since Mauricio went down with Jet Williams.
Which isn't bad for him at all. Like, we've been saying, like, that Brett Beatty better have his head on a swivel this season, because, like you said, we have guys that come up as reinforcements now, and he's not the next best thing. It's just sliced bread in the Mets organization anymore. That time has passed him. As unfair as it is, in a 120-game sample size, not even a full year's worth of a full season's worth of a workload. That is absolutely the case at this point for Brett Beatty. So it's an unfair type business, but this is something that Brett Beatty now has to deal with in terms of having guys that are right on his back. And I mean, but more so towards that point with Jet Williams, like what you just said, or Drew Gilbert and Acuna starting off in AAA, what does that say about maybe the Mets front office's confidence level in the current Mets roster that they're putting together?
That they'll change it very quickly if things are not working out early in the season. I guarantee you, if the Mets start off slow in April and the outfield is not doing what Stearns wants, why wouldn't they bring them up? Just to give a little bit of a jolt to the fan base. Why
Yeah,
not?
and I think we're starting to see a new era of how the Mets play in these minor league prospects, right? Like honestly, we've been accustomed to these prospects sitting down and rotting in the minor leagues for quite some time. I've said it numerous times, like I'd like to see the Mets start jumping guys from Double A to the majors like they did with Michael Conforto. It ended up working out pretty well for them in the long run with Conforto for a couple of years there. Until the whole unfortunate situation happened with the injury, et cetera, and Boris pretty much screwing him over. But anyways, that's not the point here. Yeah, I agree with you. It's something where the Mets, I think David Stearns is going to take a little bit more of an aggressive approach with these guys. And I don't want to say that the the Mets don't believe that they're putting a true contender out there, but it makes me wonder, like, are they just BSing us and just saying, hey, like, we're going to try to sign these guys with knowing that this isn't going to be a successful team in the first half and we can have these guys get the experience in the second half. Like, I'm not saying that because honestly, how much worse can it get from last season? I think the Mets are shaping up to win more than 75 games. I've been
I
on
agree.
record saying that, but there's two sides to every fence. So like I said, like it might indicate that they're not confident in a Harrison Bader at all. He's just a placeholder for the first half of the season until maybe he gets pawned off to another team to be a defensive replacement on somebody else's bench. Like nobody really knows. Like, will we see half of the guys signed this offseason on 1 year deals like Manaya, Bader, Jorge Lopez? Will we see them for the second half of the season? And I think it is all contingent, like you said, on how successful these guys do. We're not sitting here saying they're going to be better than the Phillies or the Braves, but we'd like to at least see some competitiveness and sneak into a wild card. And if that's not feasible, then you can bet your bottom dollar. Mike Vasil's coming up. He's going to get the opportunity. You can bet your bottom dollar. Maybe they bring up a guy like Drew Gilbert, whether it's before the trade deadline or after. I think that he's going to be pretty much ready. I think whatever I see from him in the minor league farm system, I mean, he's been showing why he could be a potential five-tool player. I mean, everything about his game I like. And Jet Williams probably, like I said, the consensus to be maybe the most ready of them all, even given his stature. I know a lot of people push back on Jet Williams' ability to hit for power at the major league level, given his stature, but I won't discredit the kid. He's been rising through the ranks and he's been doing something right in order to get here in a short amount of time. So props to him. I think the Mets are set up in any case in 2024 for an interesting season nonetheless, because if it's not winning baseball, then we're going to see what these prospects are about. And it's going to be just as exciting, to be honest.
Yeah, honestly, very true, very true. So let's finish it up with our final words, your final thoughts, Chris. As the Eagles are losing 13-0, which is always nice as
Let's
Cowboys
go. I'm
for years. So uh, so give me your final thoughts about, I guess, the rest of this offseason. I guess what projections you might have with this team right now. I know you brought it up really quickly, but your final thoughts and talk whatever you got to talk about with your channel, buddy.
Yeah, man, my channel, like I said, I talk about the New York Mets. Like this is a team that I love, but I have to be realistic about them, and I talk about them in an objective light. Like I'm not a downer type of Mets fan where I'm gonna just continually crap on them. Like why didn't they go after XYZ? But I'm also not gonna gas them up and make them out to be something that they're clearly not going into 2024. So if you want to hear more objective Mets talk, come over to my channel, subscribe to the channel at CPNY Sports. I run my own podcast as well, True Mets Talk, and we obviously do the live streams on Fridays, and we'll be doing Tuesdays and Fridays on the Interstate Mets Report when the season finally kicks off. But like I said, I'm projecting the Mets to at least be better than last season. I think that the signings have been pretty decent given the nature of what we've been expecting all along with this offseason, and especially when we got into the offseason, what the Mets have front office has truly showed us they're going to be doing this entire offseason with the 1 year deal, short-term deals, and pretty much using this as a bridge year. Like I didn't buy it at the beginning of the offseason, but now we're pretty much here. We've been giving a blatant answer, right? We've been given a blatant answer from this team. So yeah, I think 80 to 82 wins is certainly feasible. that'll put you at least in contention for a back-end wild card spot if that's something that the Mets front office is seriously gunning for. But if not, like I said, there is going to be prospects coming up. And I think that Yuki even said Christian Scott here as well is probably one of the better pitchers in the system, to be honest with you. He's better than Mike Vasil in terms of everybody's projections right now. But Mike Vasil has just been a little bit further on along the lines in AAA so far. So we'll see how they play both of those situations out. But like I said, nothing but love to the chat. Thank you guys for coming in here and tuning into this podcast, this stream. We do this every Monday night unless some crazy news happens with the Mets, then we'll do a little impromptu. So turn on those notifications to both of our channels, subscribe to both channels, hit that thumbs up on both channels. And it's a pleasure talking about this team with you, man, regardless, because honestly, it's been fun. Even if we don't have the most exciting of news to talk about in terms of the Mets going through with these signings, it's been fun to at least sort of project what the Mets' next move might be. It's been fun to do that at the very minimum. So I am hoping everybody else gets a kick out of it that's been coming here and chatting it up with us. And I thoroughly appreciate everyone's support. So I'll leave it at that. Let's go Mets and have a great rest of your night.
Absolutely. Projections are always fun until the projections are not what we expected, but you get to hear us rant and bitch about it the entire season. So enjoy. So you can find him at CP New York Sports on X, and CPNY Sports Network on YouTube. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Another Mets Hot Stove in the books. Sooner or later, we'll get the whole roundtable crew together. It's, with the holidays and all this craziness going around, the weather has been bad. I know Hayden's going back to school as well, so it's a lot of moving parts here. But we will be back together at some point. But we always do appreciate you checking all our channels out and hanging out with us on Mets Hot Stove. So once again, another Hot Stove in the books. Have a great night, guys. As always, Met fans, let's go Mets. Chris, it's always a pleasure. Good night to the chat. Let's go Mets. See you next time, guys. Good night.
Let's go Mets.
Oh, they're hollering and cheering and they're in their seats. They go to meet the Mets. All the fans are true to the orange and blue.